everyone, welcome. I wanted to do a brief video just to say hello and see how everybody's doing with their papers, and just to give you some hints today about some ideas that can help you polish your paper a little more, or to avoid some of the more common perils that people encounter when writing their works. Now, as you can see to the right of my screen, there were a couple of tips here that are a little sarcastic and kind of touch on ways that you can write the worst paper ever. In other words, if you follow these mistakes, you will get yourself a paper that is not a good one. So without further ado, let's see what we've got. Number one, we already know how to write the worst paper ever. Step one, 1-inch margins. Obviously, if you go into Word and you fiddle with Word, it is usually going to default to a 1-inch margin, so that's fine. But if you change that and make it like a 3-inch margin and condense your text quite a bit, it makes you look like you have a lot more pages on your work. But in reality, all it does is just lengthen the work, and you're kind of shortening the way that the format should be. Likewise, if you'll notice some of my fonts, the one that's far to the right that looks like all those odd little symbols, I actually had somebody in an online school where I used to work who wrote an entire paper written in those symbols. Needless to say, I don't have a clue what that paper actually said, and I had to return it to the student and ask the student to redo it. You should use Times New Roman. Note my sarcasm of don't use Times New Roman. This is a good font. Times New Roman standard 11 or 12 is usually how most people write papers. Fonts like Arial can be used, but be aware that some professors don't really care for them too well. And you'll want to also keep an eye on that, because some professors will actually not even accept it if it's not in the proper APA format. So with that in mind, you'll want to keep that at kind of to the lower level. Likewise, single spacing. We really don't want single spaced papers. They are very difficult to read and even more difficult to correct. It kind of condenses your text and makes it one big blob, and that makes it super duper hard to read and even harder to understand. Likewise, I've had people where they triple space their paper, and again, you've got so much space between lines and text that I'm just at a loss. So bear that in mind. Number 3, never ever use spell check. Again, I'm being sarcastic. Please don't take this to be literal. But most people usually try to use spell check. Occasionally, I do have some people where they just write the work and then hand it on in and don't ever spell check it whatsoever. Spell check can help, and it is handy, but also please do be aware of the fact that if you do confuse commonly confused words like your, and your, or to, and to, or there, and there, then it will not catch those, and that can be a problem. I do actually recommend, it's not on my slide, but there is an app called Grammarly. For those of you who are on Facebook, I've gone ahead and put it on my slide on the right. For those of you on Facebook, it occasionally posts little posts about different grammar concepts. It does actually have a download available for Microsoft Word. So if you find yourself making constant grammar errors, then that might be something that you might want to try and to consider. So just throwing that out there. They do have a premium version of it that costs some money, but I strongly encourage you just to stick with the free one, because that can actually come up with some pretty good stuff. Commas. We all love the comma. Okay, I'm being very sarcastic on that one. But commas can be very difficult to use. People often do misuse them. As you can see by the first point on my slide, there is a thing called a comma splice, which is where you have a comma in between two complete sentences, and it's not big enough to hold back the two complete sentences on its own. So if you do have an item of that nature, that would obviously need to be revised. Conversely, I have some people who get very excited about commas and proceed to put commas everywhere they can possibly imagine. You don't want to necessarily do that either. So ask yourself, if you're putting commas all over the place, do you really need them there? And if so, why? What function does it serve? And especially if you have it in between a subject and a verb in a sentence, such as, the boys were studying. The boys, comma, were studying would obviously not need to have a comma. It doesn't really fit. Incomplete sentences. That would be what we call a sentence fragment. It's usually missing a subject or a verb, and it happens. People will sometimes start writing and they kind of miss that item. So a way to avoid that would be to go ahead and maybe try proofreading your paper out loud. Another item that you can encounter, as it's on here, a run-on sentence. You've all seen those. It's also called a fused sentence. And they go straight into a new sentence without so much as a semicolon, and these can really mess up your writing. All one word, or all one sentence. So that can confuse audiences as well. Let's see. We talk about subjective items. Homonyms. Here it is. Proofreading. Obviously, you should proofread. You can try proofreading silently to catch mistakes. I do actually strongly encourage people to read out loud if that is something that you are able to do. I even more strongly encourage you, if you have a friend, family member, somebody online, have them read your paper to you, because then that way things that don't make sense will stand out a little more. Likewise, try not to procrastinate and try to get started early, as we see here. If you procrastinate, then that's something that's obviously going to be a problem. We've had all kinds of things happen. In my travels as an English teacher, I've seen students where they end up, something happens at home. A child goes into the hospital, or God forbid, you go into the hospital, or your computer crashes, it's got a virus, it won't be back from the computer shop for 2 weeks. All these things are things that I've actually seen happen with students. I've also had it happen where you swear you saved your assignment, but you can't find it anywhere and it's nowhere to be found. So by starting early, if heaven forbid those emergencies happen, you've at least got a draft of a paper that you can still hand in. Worst case scenario, it's always better to hand in something rather than nothing. So at least having a draft of a paper can help you to have something prepared, even if that's all you have. Try to read books. I know that's easier said than done nowadays. Not everybody has time. But if you do have some spare time, reading books, reading newspapers, reading magazines can go a long way to helping you to developing your vocabulary and your writing skills. You don't necessarily need to sit down and read a classic novel. I don't expect anybody to take on Charles Dickens' Tale of Two Cities during the course of this class. But maybe reading the latest James Patterson, or catching a section from the local paper, or even just reading things on the internet sometimes like the news can help you. Be sure to hit up our writing center as well, and also ask me. Plagiarizing. Plagiarizing is something I wanted to mention because sometimes people inadvertently do this and they don't mean to do it because they don't quite know how to cite correctly. What happens is you find a website on the internet, it sounds really good, it sounds pretty much like the same thing you thought when you read the work or whatever, and it sounds like almost what you would have said in your own words if you had thought of it first. So you copy and paste a section, place it into your paper, and hand your paper in. And you would be wrong, unfortunately, if you did that. That's plagiarism because you didn't give credit to the person whose words those actually were. So with that in mind, you would want to go ahead and obviously give credit to the website. A couple of ways you can go about doing this. You can say that I was browsing the internet and I found an article by Mary Jones, and her thoughts on Moby Dick were outstanding, and I feel the same way because. That's giving credit to the source. You can also cite parenthetically, which says Jones, 2012, in her article states that Moby Dick was an insurmountable foe. Now that's telling you that obviously you went and you got this from someplace else. So those are things you want to watch out for. You don't want to just copy and paste from other sources without giving credit to them. And you don't want to just copy and paste big blocks of text either, because that can be a problem. So those are some things to bear in mind. I've had a couple of people stumble with that, so I wanted to mention it really briefly just so you get a general idea. Of course, if you don't really know how to cite, then the person to ask would be myself or our writing lab, because we'll be glad to help you with that. A couple of people stumbled also with the thesis statement. So the thesis statement, obviously it should be one sentence and it should surround the entire purpose of your whole paper. So one sentence, what is this paper all about? So for example, and usually I tell people try to have 3 points because then you can talk about those 3 points. So using the topic of drug addiction. Drug addiction can be viewed as a disease and should be treated by, give me 3 things that you would find to treat them. And that would be a way that you could then segue into your topic and build effectively. Last but not least, it says, obviously, start with the thesis and the introduction. Make sure your body of your paper ties back to it. We've talked about that. And try to avoid first person. Objective writing usually involves third person. We want to keep that in mind. So I know for a narrative essay, obviously, if I'm asking you to tell your own story, you're probably going to speak in first person, and that's okay. But if you're writing something that is an academic paper or research paper, you'll want to use third person. So try writing with items like I think, I feel, I believe, and then when you're doing the revising stage of your paper, you can go back through, remove the I think and I feel and I believe, and simply focus on the content itself. Okay, so there's some general tips for success. Those are my sarcastic little comments. So basically, everything that's on here is the opposite of what you should be doing. And I went ahead and told you the real way that you can make it happen. If you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to email me or to meet with me during my scheduled live chat session online. I look forward to seeing you all in the classroom, and have a wonderful afternoon, and thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.